want to invite forward those members of the Leader Training and Education PMM. If you don't know who you are on the list, I'm also part of it, so I'll interject at moments. As they come forward, I just want to invite, if folks are sitting in a way where they're angled away from the front of the room, if we might turn or pivot chairs. I know for me, looking and seeing your smiling faces is really a gift. And to hear your colleague, Laura's giving me her smiling face back there. Thank you, Laura. So thank you for turning and tending to your colleagues and the wisdom that they will share. Poor Marie, you deserve a seat on or a booster seat. Is that an option, a booster seat? So welcome, Marie. It's wonderful to have you in the room. You were a voice in the chat, giving us good words yesterday, and just really wonderful to have you here. To remind all of us, what we're going to do is invite these program staff members to each share where they see faith formation, where they see discipleship in the program that they represent in this PMM. Their work includes lots of other things, but there are particular projects that they've brought forward here. So Leda will time us with 2 minutes and give us a 1-minute warning and a 30-second warning. If you're like me, you'll completely miss that and gloss gone by, but this is a big PMM, so we're going to try and stay fairly close to that. Some of these folks have multiple projects, so we'll give them a chance to speak about each independently. And then I will respond and invite Rebecca from her chair over there to do the same with either something that we're hearing or an idea that we have or a kind of concept that seems lifted up for the good of all of us. Any questions about process? Then at the close, we hope you all are listening. Oh, look at that. Chair's right. Thank you. Girl chair for moving. At the very close, we will, of course, invite responses from all of you. And then at the end, over lunch, hopefully additional time to respond. So we're going to share the microphone and pass it along. And why don't we go in the order as we're seated? Because if I try and keep track on this very big list, I'm going to get all kinds of lost over here. So Michelle, tell us about your project.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I followed rules. I wrote down one sentence. So this is for the Asian Leaders Training and Development Series. The particular initiative is the Exchange, which is localized events in which participants learn about one another's stories, there's testimony, and bear witness to where God has and is moving amongst one another.
There we go. And do you want to share more about discipleship with it?
Well, I think the testimony sharing is the biggest aspect.
Use your 2 minutes. Stretch beyond that one sentence.
Yeah, I think it primarily is in testimony sharing with one another and cultivating a spirit of openness to hearing from one another's journeys. Because within that Asian diaspora, oftentimes people kind of stay in their own ethnic communities. Either that or they go far away from the ethnic community. So there's an aspect of honoring those stories, of owning those stories, and being able to share in that with one another. Just seeing where God is present in those journeys.
Thank you, Michelle. As I'm listening, I'm hearing the layers of what it means to honor our own individual, our familial, our collectivist, and then one another's stories. And you're reminding us that testimony is a practice of not only invoking, sharing, testifying, listening. And we didn't reflect as much yesterday on the power of receiving testimony. And so thank you for reminding us that we are equipping leaders to do both. Beautiful. Rebecca, do you want to respond or move on to your project? You get to choose.
Well, just a brief response to think about how the exercise we've been doing at tables today, inviting you to remember and share, is also a spiritual practice of testimony. And I've heard from several folks that there is a way in which there's spiritual formation happening as you are invited to share those testimonies. And that's part of the Christian tradition. So really powerful to think about the ways that inviting people intentionally say, no, what we expect from you is you to tell your story. And how does that form them and shape them? I'm assuming you also do things like open in prayer, maybe have some worship and those kinds of more traditional spiritual formation practices as well. Oh, that's great. Did you want to do your second project?
My second one is singing for CYO.
Oh, that's it. Okay. I saw two. I'm looking at it over her shoulder. I shouldn't do that. Okay, so since I have the microphone, I'll keep it out. Okay. So I have two. I will do one. Oh, wait, I'm already done with 1 minute. I just started.
She's timing our response. We're all responding.
Oh, I'm done responding. So I'm going to talk about my initiative, which is not just mine, of course. None of us are doing these solo, but Discipleship Summit, which is an annual event that we have designed both in keeping with a tradition that we inherited from the previous discipleship ministries leaders. And also we've intentionally chosen to align our Discipleship Summit themes with the ABC USA mission table priorities. So we have missiological priorities, they have missiological priorities. And there's pretty strong alignment. So the first year we did Baptist identity. What does it mean to be Baptist, American Baptist at the Discipleship Summit? Last year we did intergenerational faith. This year we're going to do mental health, mental well-being across generations. I would just like to disclaim I have not yet had my tea. So part of the task of Discipleship Summit is equipping people, inviting people to think about these topics as forms of discipleship. Taking care of self is part of the golden rule. Love God and neighbor as you love yourself. And the church has not always been great at taking care of mental well-being. I was just reading a colleague's capstone project for her team in last night. In bed, I will admit.
Caring for your well.
Talking about mental well-being of our trans and non-binary siblings. So these are things that are part of our spiritual formation and they are part of our pastoral care for others. So, am I out of time?
You're way over. It's not going to post those that said the form violated first.
You asked the question.
Rebecca, this is a tricky one, right? Because we do so much of this work together. So I was trying to listen with new ears and I wanted to lift up and name the power of aligning with others with whom you are in partnership. Mm-hmm. That there is a way in which we don't walk the Christian journey alone. We seek connections with those both like and ideally not like, those who stretch us beyond our inclinations. So I really appreciate you naming that alignment with the mission table priorities. Honestly, as we're talking, what came to me was a picture of when Michelle hosted Love the Lord with All Your Mind. And there were watch parties. Folks gathered together. And I thought, well, we didn't name that yesterday in the hybrid conversation. The power of inviting people to form their own in-person connection. Erica spoke of it some around the global leadership and being in a site. But I wonder if you've thought, about are there ways that we can more actively encourage this year that people would join together, that the remote or hybrid folks will not just be a single face on a screen, but people in the living room prepared to continue the conversation in that lunchtime or the meeting after the meeting and so on.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. That is something that we have had groups who participate in Discipleship Summit do. They have gathered, they bought the group ticket, and they gather at their own church. And when we do a breakout room, a small group discussion, they're in their own physical space having that discussion. It works better with one keynote speaker, right?
For sure.
So yeah, that's a great way to think about spiritual formation for those groups as well as those who might be here or online individually. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you all a question, just a quick check-in, because we've got like 2 hours and 15 minutes. Have you given your colleague, each other enough time, so is it 2 minutes? I mean, might you splurge and give them 3? I'm just saying, that's not a directive, but it may be better to modify it. This is a valuable part of the sharing. And I'm sitting here concerned that, because I think people are sensitive, they don't want to go over it. But we may be eclipsing something really important. If somebody, does it really throw us off if they take 3 or 4 minutes?
It does not. It does not. And we start early, so we have a little opportunity to expand.
I'm an English major, so check my math. It will throw us off significantly, but I think there's enough cushion in the schedule as you've designed it that we can eat into that little space of work.
We'll honor the conversation more than the clock. One other thing I want to name, Rebecca, for consideration, because this came out in your description, the power of embedding in whatever worship happens in that time, a time of confession. We have not honored those among us who struggle with mental illness. We have, in fact, excluded them largely from the practice of being church. So confession is an act of spiritual practice.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm still designing this, so
Yes,
it's a good thought to consider if there's a litany or some kind of practice, especially with that kind of group convening to think about. I'll go ahead to my second project.
Do you have a second one here? I don't have a second one listed.
I have the Baptist Polity, Being Baptist track/course.
Well, there it is.
Okay. So, fresh in my mind, because I did it last night, and I was watching myself do it, for what practices of spiritual formation do I have in here? Because I approach it more in an academic way. This is an online 6-week certificate course that we do twice a year. And it's primarily for new clergy in American Baptist life. They're either pursuing their ordination or they're ordained in another tradition and they're seeking to have their credentials recognized. Sometimes they're just curious. I'm serving a federated or duly aligned church and I want to adequately represent the other people in the congregation. So this is one of the few meetings that I convene that I remember to pray at the beginning. So I'm often very agenda-driven. So that's my little confession. And I was noticing how much storytelling comes up in these cohort meetings. As we were talking about baptism, for example, and the people's own baptism stories, and how it connects with our Baptist identity and Baptist distinctives. And so I do a lot of work in this cohort thinking about how our theology gets worked out in church life as well. So I usually experience many of the cohort members having these personal epiphanies about their own convictions about Baptist faith, life, what the ordinances, baptism and communion have meant, still mean today.
Thank you, Rebecca. I want to name something that I think we'll hear recurring throughout these projects, and you've articulated it really well, which is these leaders arrive for themselves often. I need this for ordination. My region has required this of me. And then one of the things that emerges is the discovery of I'm in a new spiritual community. We're actually engaged in spiritual practices, so I'm opening in new ways. But then they depart as leaders to bring these practices to their congregation. So I think you again, this is a project I see a little more closely than some of the others, but I know you empower them with prompts that don't need to end with their own response on the discussion board. It can become a Christian education course discussion. It can become a sermon series, etc. So I think leaders who in turn extend the conversation into their congregations is really a powerful mark of this PNM in particular.
Yeah. The other thing I'll note about this course in this PMM is that it also has connections to networking capacity building. Denominationally, ABC USA has had the orientation to ABC Life. I tend to use this course as an intensive on ABHMS as well as larger American Baptist life, because I get to emphasize what we do in this course, through this course. And I'm identifying the emerging leaders in American Baptist life. So I will often hand off to an Asian pastor, to Michelle, and a pastor in a particular region to a colleague who is working out in that region. So community building as a spiritual formation practice also happens through this.
Amen. Thanks, Rebecca. Alexandria.
You can just take a picture.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah. I'm sorry, still don't put one. I did go by the sheet that you guys provided, so I have stuff written down. My project within this PMO, is the Emerging Leaders Cohort. It's a year-long program, cohort of young adults between the ages of 18 and 28 who engaged in a summer internship at the Summer Pastoring Institute and meet for facilitating meetings once a month during the academic year that helps shape their leadership skills through creating a project that addresses an issue in their community. Every session is facilitated through the lens of storytelling, advocacy, organizing, and networking. I would also like to add that we are also in partnership with ABHMS Building Bridges, so building and transforming communities as well as the ICN and Building Bridges. Discipleship within the program looks like prayer to start and end each session, giving students the opportunity to share their questions and opinions with each other and chosen facilitators. I really stressed with the facilitators. Most of them were ABHMS staff, but for those that weren't, that it wasn't, I didn't want them just talking at the students, but more of an interactive experience. And sometimes it is like pulling teeth with young adults and getting them to respond, but once they get into the ebb and flow of things, typically they start to respond and share their ideas with each other. Encouraging partnership with their peers and equipping them with the necessary resources to do so. I also think walking alongside young adults as the leaders as they already are, so meeting them where they're at and encouraging them to use their own voices to positively affect the people that they interact with on a daily basis. Also giving them autonomy and ownership of their projects because they know, I believe that they know what's best for the people that they care most about and who they interact with on a daily basis, right? And so we're just offering them a structure to dive deeper into that location, into their interests. But at the end of the day, I'm very opinionated. And so I could have, I could have easily chosen a social justice issue and been like, this is what we're talking about for the entire year. And I wouldn't have felt bad about it. But it is important for young adults to be able to feel like, you know, they do have ownership of what it is that they care most about. And so just giving them that time and space to talk about it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, which is kind of against what this whole thing is, but like in a ministry context, like we have some folks who, there's one particular student who her project is about creating accessibility through grant writing for theater. And so like that's something that's near and dear to her heart. She is connected to ABC, like ABC World, ABC Church, but I didn't want them to feel like this had to be ministry within four walls of the church. So those are all different ways in which we,
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alexandria. Though I can't see you down this line. I'm watching you here and there, and I wrote many notes as you were speaking. You did such a beautiful job of kind of framing out, here's the activity when we gather, here's the meaning that it has. And the very first thing I wrote is faith in action. When I talked about that earlier in our missiology, I thought you were articulating this, so that is a primary kind of outcome, a primary motivation for offering this. Thank you for lifting up empowering people to share their opinion as a way of spiritual practice. I think that aligns as well with Michelle. And as she said, to own your story, to believe your story has validity and worth, and the conclusions you draw about the world the body of Christ needs. I also, I loved what you said about it can feel like pulling teeth at the beginning. I actually pictured Darren's ceramic practice. I thought you have to soften clay, right? You can't just begin with clay. And so thinking together as a PMM about what are the practices that soften play when we have a group that is not prepared necessarily or trusting with each other and with us to share themselves yet. That would be really fruitful for us to pursue. I have more, but you did a beautiful job. And Rebecca, I don't know if there's anything in addition you want to respond to.
Yeah, in response to what you just said, Jennifer, it constantly feels like pulling teeth, and it's interesting because in the biennial, like, we have this project, Abigail and Michelle and I, about like best practices, like when working with young adults. And so something that I had said is like there are no rules. Like in my opinion, as a young adult myself, there's no rules. So something that works with one person may not work with the other, and so it's literally meeting them where they're at. And sometimes it feels like, okay, I've been emailing you, I've been texting you, I've been calling you. You still are not getting a point. But then they'll send selfies, right, of each other and like, oh, I was in this town and we went to this thing together. I'm like, oh, so you do like each other. And you do like us. Like, so it's like, it really just depends on the individual. And you just kind of have to hope and trust that like they're receptive and they are doing the work. It just doesn't look the same as like what you had imagined, but they're still doing it, and that's okay.
Love that. Thank you. The self-administered, Dr. Peck, is that?
I'm just gonna add another spiritual formation practice that I'm hearing in what you're describing is the way you're being formed by these young leaders. And that's one of the, in CCL, when we talk about adult learning or adult education, we learn as much and are formed as much by the leaders we work with as they are by us. And so just an opportunity for us to be always growing in our spiritual formation as we attempt to lead others in there. Really cool.
Okay. So my project in this PMM is it's Native American leadership training, but this particular part, I basically two parts to my leadership training. One, and this one is introducing Native leaders to ABHMS resources, and particularly right now, CCL courses, and helping them walk through through these courses to help build their toolkit, build their capacity to provide leadership to their churches. We want to identify Native adult leaders who are interested in building their learning and experience to improve their ability to minister to their communities, to their churches. And I'm looking at through one is some of our signature marks that I've identified to help as leaders who build on their creative passions and further develop practical skills for effective ministry. Leaders who curate and contextualize best practices related to continuous learning and leader development. So for this year, I plan to pick 4 CCL courses to lead them through, one each quarter. So particularly this first quarter, I've identified Listen to Your Life. And the reason why, I had discussions with Maria about how we can shape this better. And one is to begin to encourage our churches and the Native leadership to continue to get more involved in the ministry of the church and I think to feel like they are part of the ministry. I think a lot of times in church, and this probably goes beyond Native churches, but a lot depends on the clergy to, the ordained leaders to do the work of ministry. And the more, the more we go through things, the more the realization, and it actually connects to my other project, which I'll talk about this afternoon, with the youth ministry is the need for mentors and building relationships. And so what I see is, using the listen to your life, I believe will help our leaders to realize that they're in the ministry and that we saw the scripture, all the gifts are given. Many people have various gifts, and part of that for me is recognizing and helping people recognize their gifts and recognizing that they are part of the ministry, and whatever they do it's like saying everything we do is discipleship. So everything we do is ministry. Every part of the roles that a person will play within their church, within their community, within their ministry, is ministering to the people. And so that's one of my first goals for this year, is to kind of begin to get the prime the pump, I say, people thinking, okay, I'm a part of this. It's not just the role of our pastors. And I think people do that, but I don't think they think about it. So.
Thank you so much, Ben. I right away wrote equipping the saints. Each of the kind of title of what you're sharing is coming to me. So I thought of you as equipping the saints. And one of the questions that I had, I'll talk about Listen to Your Life in a second because you brought that in, and thank you. It's one of my projects in here, so I'll just briefly describe what it is so others know. Thank you for using that. I found myself thinking, what is our loop back around, where the toolkits already existing in your leaders come back to us to be resources that we share with others. So I love how you're saying, we want them to see these tools are there for them. I want them to also see that we want tools that they see we need. And so thinking together about what is that conversational loop, and Listen to Your Life is kind of perfect. It's a resource on vocational discernment. There are 5 days of short video courses put together by different ABHMS staff and partners. Each day includes content, theological reflection, an activity for the person to do, and testimony. So they're actually really designed around spiritual practices, but every single one of those has added readings. We added movement when Sophia Deal came. We just keep building. So let's put on our calendar, this is a personal notation for me, after you use that, to return and say, are there people who access this that might have something to contribute to grow it further?
Yes, for sure.
Awesome. Rebecca, did you want to respond as well?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that I'm hearing a theme from more than one up here in the ways that you're trying to really nurture people into their own understanding of themselves as leaders. And that's not always easy to do, but it is a form of discipleship, right? As we equip those who follow Jesus into making new followers of Jesus. And that is not just evangelism, it's also leadership, justice work. And I just really appreciate hearing that as a practice in our leader training as a form of spiritual formation.
Rebecca, as you said that, I thought, hey, Micah has been recording. I bet he got Darren's devotion yesterday. That's a perfect message about receiving your unique and individual call, embracing how God is calling you. So I would love to incorporate that. We'll talk, but incorporate that perhaps as one of those access on your own additional resources to continue reflection on this. Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Abner, I think is whose shoes I can see.
Thank you.
The challenge of this line, the train terminal.
Hi again, everyone. My project in this PMF is the Conferencia de Liderazgo Intergenerational Leadership Conference. And this event trains and equips leaders and pastors about intergenerational emphasis in the context. It can be churches or non-profit organizations. We started to do this because in our conversation with the Latino track at the forum, the main challenge for them or concern was the youth and the younger generations. And the question about why are the youth leaving the church and many things, we started to think about, okay, we can provide resources and we can educate generations about other generations. And these events, the topics are very contextual, but regarding to the faith formation, the intention is to strengthen the community. For me, community consists of all generations and not only one. And many churches, if you identify the churches, how they operate, most of them, the leadership and everything, the emphasis comes from one generation in that sense. And for example, in Puerto Rico, there are many churches that they don't have children ministry or youth ministry, and we have themes, sub-themes, depending the context. But for example, intergenerational mission, intergenerational discipleship, immigration, interculturality, and we are educating about generations, and I can provide you examples that I think it consists of faith formation. One generation, I think it was the generation, I am millennial, the generation that came before millennium, maybe worse.
Gen X left off of every generational thing. Not to get a chip on our shoulder. Yes.
I apologize. But one example that I have is that
We might have a person.
and I remember in the 80s and 90s, that term, many things stayed for a long period. You can listen albums from the Beatles, Guns N' Roses, and many other things, and you can listen now. But right now, in the music, you can sing, you can listen one song, and in 3 months, 6 months, that song's disappear. Well, not disappear, but not, yes, it's not. And in the liturgy, in the church, I can provide an example with the Reina Valera. How many of you know the Reina Valera translation? Louder. Reina Valera translation is like the King James. And for that generation, the Reina Valera was the Bible. Not only, not other translation, it's included in the church. And when you see that difference with the younger generation, that they prefer older translations, that creates a challenge in the community. And that is one of the samples, but the event is to give resources for them and for them to create new spaces and provide new ideas for intergenerational engagement with families.
Wow, I'm still getting over you connecting the Beatles and Guns N' Roses. So I'm gonna. I was like, those are really different eras. So my brain's catching up here. I really appreciate you lifting up, Elder, the rapid rate of change. And what does it mean to worship the God who is the same yesterday, today, forever, and evermore in the midst of a world that is changing at exceedingly rapid pace? And I love what I hear and see in your leadership, not only in how you talked about it now, but where I witness it in other places, is that you honor the tradition and name the truth of that change. And holding that both and is a spiritual practice, essential for our leaders, because it is so easy to alienate someone with how we approach things. So thank you for modeling that both and. Go ahead, you were going to chime in.
Yes, and another detail that I forgot is that we are including history, philosophy, theology, because the first generation thinks differently than the second and third generation in that case. And I think that kind of education can be challenged because you have the diversity in that sense, but again, it is not to have different leader groups in the church, but to create a community where everyone can learn from each other.
I love that. I'm thinking about how the theme for Space for Grace was engaging intergenerational faith, and how we only occasionally think of ourselves within the STEP community as having unique generational identities. But you saw it when we said, what's that all Gen Xers were like, rise it up. Right? And I just want to name, though this is not the focus of your project, I deeply appreciate when other members of this team bring their generationally contextualized wisdom to me. I often end the conversation with someone saying, oh, that was an unexpected change moment for me. You know, that was an aha that I didn't come in looking for. So I invite us to think about our intergenerational faith as well. Rebecca, you want to respond?
have a lot to add on this one. I know I'm really excited about all the work that's being done in CLI, and I have less appreciation for it, only because it's in Spanish language, and I do not speak the language of the angels.
But you're learning.
I'm working on it. I am fiercely attending to my Duolingo. And I'm just also noticing that I think, Michelle, you mentioned cultivating curiosity in the people who participate, and I hear you doing the same thing in a different way, trying to encourage each generation to be curious about how the Holy Spirit is moving in each generation and what we might be able to learn from one another. Again, adult learners. Older generations, especially in certain cultures, have a harder time. Like, I know my young adults are always reminded, not a kid anymore. Like, yes, honey, but you'll always be my kid. So, and there are ways in which we have to change the way we relate to people because they are adults. So, just noticing that curiosity is a spiritual value and allowing ourselves to be changed by what we're curious about is another kind of spiritual foundation.
Thank you. Great.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My project in this PMM is Intercultural Leadership Institute. It seeks to be a premier resource, equipping faith leaders and disciples, courageously fostering transformable loving communities across race, ethnicity, and other cultural distinctions. And we do this through 4 different divisions. I will focus primarily on the tiered education series because that is what we are rolling out mostly. Digital resources, our online bank is another one, but I'll focus more on the elites. And this is primarily webinar and hybrid. It's delivered through the CCL. So a lot of it is content, but I think one of the things that we are intentionally trying to do through the ILI tiered education series is complexifying people's theologies, particularly contextual theology. So we're trying to give them frameworks to help them realize that their own faith is a contextual faith and not necessarily a universal faith. But many of us don't know the water we swim in, don't know the air that we breathe, and don't realize that there are nuances even among fellow Christians. And so one of the aims of the ILI is to complexify it and say, you have a contextual theology, not just a Christian theology. And so we do that by giving certain frameworks. 4 levels is one of them, so we help them think about their faith intrapersonally, so their own experience, interpersonally with other people, organizationally, how faith lives out in policy and practices and in systems, and societally, how they live out their faith in public square. And then we also have another tool that we give that helps them think about faith in relation to cultures and interacting with other cultures to the developmental model of their cultural sensitivity. Particularly in that model, it's pushing on the Christian ethic of unity. And because that's our default, is we want to focus on how we are the same in Christ, how we are unified in Christ, maybe not the same, but how we are unified in Christ. And often that leads to focusing on what is common. And we're trying to push that and say we want to look at what's different. Because in that we honor one another's contextual theologies and our expansion of who God is. Who God is expanded in our lives. So
Beautiful. I started out the day talking about the need for simplicity. On the other side, there's the need for complexity, right? So the Christian practice of complexifying. I'm a complexifier naturally, people tell me, so thank you for helping me claim that as a spiritual value. Marie, as you were talking, I began thinking of moments in Scripture where we are either given a genealogy or an ethnic identifier or a location from which one has come. And sometimes that gets simplified as, why is so-and-so unnamed? Like, why is that woman unnamed? Maybe there's something in her identity, her context. And, it is a distinctly scriptural value to say, this person has a context. Their encounter with Jesus, their understanding of this moment is rooted in that context. Don't forget it as you hear the story. So I love that you're helping us to do that and to enter in When we lead devotions, we are coming out of our own rootedness and seeking to extend beyond that, but we maybe should name that more often. Here's where this is rooted inside me. So thank you for this offering that does that. You were ready to respond. Please do.
Yeah. And so what we're gonna develop more out on in spiritual practices is tier 2, which tier 1 is focusing on expanding knowledge and tools. Tier 2 is focusing on character building and skill mastery. And so, particularly for leaders, it's not just receiving others' experiences and truths, but how do you create space where you foster the multiplicity, which often then challenges your own sense of authenticity and identity. And so there's a lot of that sort of who we are in God in that tier 2. And so incorporating different spiritual practices to tend to the leader's soul.
I love that. I don't remember if you were online yesterday when I used the acknowledgement from Criterion and
I love it.
we're not here we're here to form knowledge, not perform expertise. And what a different posture for a leader who's been trained up to perform expertise at some level. Rebecca, do you want to respond there? I'm going to shift in a moment to questions and ideas from the room.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great transition point to move into that, because one of the things that we're going to do in the large group is talk about theological diversity. You're dealing with cultural diversity, which often is accompanied by theological diversity, because we are formed differently by our histories and our context. And many of us grow up in homogenous spaces. And so I've watched in some of the tier 1 programming that you've already done, the care that you and your facilitators give, it's pastoral care to the participants in those programs, recognizing that this is risky, it's a little scary, it's causes some uncertainty, and really an encounter with the Holy should be all of those things. So I'm noticing another contrast is we've been talking about stories and testimony, and we also have talked about practices of silence and spiritual formation, and just noticing the way that God uses these contrasting experiences to form who we are in God.
Beautiful. A reminder, we are adults, so if you need to buy a break, take it when you need it, because when we have our stretch and Coach Bill comes up here to really stretch us today, we don't want to miss that. So I want to just let you know that in 20 minutes we'll be receiving the gifts of one of our newest colleagues. There are multiple other projects within this PMM not represented in this conversation. I merely want to name them. So for me, Listen to Your Life, which you've heard about, Faithful Finance Cohorts, and also Chosen Generations, Ministry with Older Adults. Dr. Pat is not with us, Chaplaincy Skills courses, Hungry for Spiritual Direction, and Pastoral Counseling. All Comfort is part of this, as is the project that Saeed is off representing for the grant, Engaging Digital Disciples. So when leader training and education comes together, we are the largest PMM. Was that they're pointing to another one that should be? I'm just working off the list. So computers, let me know if I've got it wrong. But I wanted to just name these additional projects because this is a really full and rich PMM, and sometimes, we kind of set agenda items for other groups as well because there's so much that we do that is about leader training. Friends, you've heard a lot, and I'm sure your brains are trying to parse which is what. What are your responses? What do you hear that feels like, I am hearing that faith formation set of practices moving through here, or I have ideas and questions? And I'd invite you to come up to the microphone if you're able so that we keep capturing this for the recording. Lisa.
I wanted to, if you could just linger a little bit more around the cultivating curiosity, or how that curiosity piece plays in the practice. And you referenced it, Rebecca. You identified where it was in each of the initiatives that were discussed. But I feel like there's more to be said about that. If you could say a little more.
Since you held your 2 minutes, do you want
I think that coming to the table, we're thinking of, okay, I'm thinking of the welcome table. And truly a posture that brings us to that table that Darren shared about with her and her sisters created is a space where people who think differently, identify differently, feel differently, spiritually, whatever, carry with them so many different things. You cannot come to that table without having that posture of curiosity, of having that posture of, I need to listen, I need to learn, because I don't quite understand this, but I want to know, right? And I think that having those productive, respectful conversations is rooted in having that posture versus, you're there to respond, versus listening. I don't know if anybody else has anything like that.
So some of the ways we talk about it in the ILI work is for the purpose of curiosity is to suspend judgment, so that you are not jumping to divisions. And so we use some tools from Kaleidoscope from Eric Law. He poses 2 questions: I notice and I wonder, as a way to enter into conversation. So rather than judging, you're just simply observing what you see, and then you wonder. That's the building of the curiosity. You want to learn more. And another tool we use is DIE, where you, if there's an incident, there's a disagreement, whatever the cultural clash is, you again describe, so you're just observing, and then you investigate before you get to the evaluation. So a lot of it is around suspending judgment.
Love the tools that you're offering. And I would say the spiritual value of curiosity is very closely tied for me to the spiritual value of humility. I'm going to be humble enough to assume that maybe I don't have a corner on the truth. And so I'm going to be curious about other people's experience of God. In my fall cohort of Baptist Polity, I had a cohort member who was really tense in the first week or two because she was being confronted with so much diversity of belief that she didn't know what to do with it. And I mentioned the value of curiosity, and every week after that, she had a Curious George stuffed animal positioned in the Zoom window behind her so that she could see it on Zoom and remind herself to practice curiosity and not shut down when she heard something that made her feel unsettled or scared. And it reminded me of Michelle Birdsall's elephant the elephant that reminds us there's always something in the room. But I love that she had a visual for that, and I will never forget her Curious George doll, reminding me of the spiritual practice of curiosity.
It's perfect that you mentioned the elephant, Rebecca, because I was going to bring up Fierce, the very first Fierce principle, master the courage to interrogate reality. And many of us spoke about often that begins with, were you going to say that, Abner? You're smiling about it.
Yes, you can finish.
That it begins with interrogating our own willingness to say the way I see things is contextual.
That important about curiosity and following Marie's comment. I appreciate questions, and I think questions are very important. And when we see Jesus' style, it was more questions than answers, right? And that kind of faith formation that someone posed a question and answer with a question is sometimes a little bit difficult, but that sense of curiosity, I think the communication and the dialogue can be not more important, but more valuable.
I just wanted to add that similarly, a lot of folks use the welcome table as for personal reflection, and a lot of times, these things that I notice, I wonder, begins with that that self-reflection. I notice that I'm feeling this way, or I wonder why I'm feeling this way, or I know, I've had this, this faith my entire life. I'm just asking deeper questions about where that comes from. And the guiding questions at the end of our reflections are intended to help cultivate that sense of curiosity and wonder and noticing whether it's done, at a personal level or interpersonally with others. It's all important, and I think several moments of these panels have mentioned like meditative silence and spiritual directioning or coaching. And I just want to rename that as an important aspect of this adult formation piece.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to name something that I don't know that I've heard explicitly in our conversations yet, but really undergirds so much of what we do. And we love the leaders that we are serving.
Wow.
Because I think that foundation of, I am loved, I will not be excluded from this space. Belonging will continue to be extended to me, undergirds the capacity for curiosity. If we think there's a chance we are going to be ousted, we'll do the work first. We will make sure we put ourselves in a posture to be excluded at some level. So I just want to invite us to think about how do we nurture that love, even if it's 50 people on Zoom or 100 people or 300 people on Zoom. How do we communicate that? And I used to use the grants as a way to say, we see you, we affirm you, we love you. So now I'm thinking that, okay, I'm not giving money away anymore, so I have to think of other ways that I make sure I'm saying that each time you log it, because our leaders are hungry to be loved.
What I'm going to do is I just want to affirm the variety and diversity of tools, techniques that are being used, that are being identified over all these panels. Because when we're talking about forming leaders, spiritual formation with personal leadership, and keeping in mind that everyone that we come into contact with, they are leaders, all the people, whether they're emerging leaders, whether they're student scholarship recipients, or pastors, or youth leaders, or diverse, and so forth and so on. That's part of our mantra at Columbus Societies, that we are cultivating leaders, still leadership and mission building. So that's at the heart of what we do, and the spiritual formation of it. And I'm affirming that formation does not need to be, is not the same, and perhaps ought not be the same from one initiative or program to the other, that it really should be organic, it should be indigenous, it should be to some extent unique to the particular people group, combination of people, occasionally, ethnically, culturally, professionally, where it comes geographically. Because if an exercise or a tool is foreign to my makeup, whatever it is, it doesn't benefit me. So one person's, spiritual practice that's foreign to my culture, foreign to my way of seeing the world, that is forced, that I'm uncomfortable when I do it, there's no real benefit maybe for the person leading the exercise, not for me. It's like when you go to church. I mean, I grew up in a church that's real expressive, and you stand up and you show praise. As I get older, I find when somebody says, "Okay, stand up and go tell 5 people," it's like I don't feel like doing that. I mean, I don't, it's like really, it's more of an inconvenience for me, and I'm not sure. I haven't yet seen the benefit to God of me going around and telling 5 other preachers, "Hey, God is good," when they all preach God is good all the time. But I understand the worship leader needs that, right? So I'm going to obey because I want to get struck by lightning. But what would be more spiritually meaningful for the people in the room, and so having somebody come up, because that's their practice, that's what they grew up with, that's what they're coming from, that context, so they're imposing that. So they're all not feeling up in position, whatever the practice is, it should be, and you don't necessarily know in advance. And that's why, what I said yesterday, in the future, we may consider how we hold people in advance as to even prompt them to be genuine, thinking that an element, an aspect of what we take seriously is spiritual formation, and what might be some aspirations that you have. This is so one, so they aren't shocked by it when they come. That we are a faith-based organization, so you might expect that there's going to be an emphasis on spiritual care and on wellness. It is in our missiology for all the units for faith formation from infancy to adulthood. So this is not the first time. This just not be new to anyone because it's actually in this company's missiology, and that is in every unit missiology. So even though you may be a different PMA, it's in the cultural leadership missiology, it's in the leadership empowerment missiology, it's in all the missiologies, faith formation, so everyone should think about that. And the only other piece is really the leading, for us to personally be the leaders in the value of faith formation as an aspect of leadership formation. That underlying all of this, that the case is not obvious, underlying all of this is an assumption, a premise made on the part of the American Baptist Home Mission Societies that faith formation is an important component of effective leaders. That is something that, so as we're talking about, and I think so it doesn't go over the head, as we're talking about core values of ABHMS, I was talking about what are people's takeaways from ABHMS? And so it's like, so at ABHMS, they really got this thing that they think leaders are quality people with faith formation is crucial to them. Now, not everybody emphasizes that point. It's not a really bizarre point. It's not that like earth-shattering. It's not that, but it's amazing how it may not be lifted up as a core value. There are other things that, if you notice, we are saying as we grow in leadership cultivation that are surfacing, that may have made certain missiologies. In the past couple of years, a lot of talk about mental and emotional wellness. In the future, we might ask not that. Should that be something that we consider to be a part of? It's going to be in the leadership empowerment. It's going to be in the leadership empowerment thing that we do.
Yes.
That leaders who are healthy mentally and emotionally, wellness, personal wellness. And everybody has to have the physique of a fashion model. We're not talking about body appearance or body shapes, but thinking about diet, thinking about whatever that I overheard somebody talking this morning about the need for sleep. They need to have so much. And I'm getting to that point. You and Jules are talking. I need. I have capabilities. I need a certain hour number of hours of sleep in order to function and perform well. So what we're trying to identify in leadership are what are the things that leaders need. Financial literacy. We have embraced that now as an ongoing aspect of our. So this is right up there with that effective leaders, impactful leaders, whether they are students, whether they are pastors, whether they are camp leaders, whether they are, whatever their vocation or faith, we are so bold, hopefully not arrogant, but we are so bold as to say that when you come to ABHMS, at some point in time, if you're with us for a while or over time, you're going to hear that we value faith formation, we value emotional mental wellness, we value financial wellness, that it's not healthy to be broke all the time. Okay, it's that's not good for you. Okay, and so it may be a reality. I know as you said before, you have with me always, but that's not a mandate or a commandment. That was an acknowledgement of a reality. But in my preaching and teaching, I don't think that preachers being broke is a good thing. I fundamentally don't believe that. That's not the statements, but I don't believe that. And what it is, and so that's why I take compensation seriously. Pay people, pay them well if you can, and so forth and so on. They work hard for this stuff, and there's no reason why people in law, medicine, finance should be okay, while we should be struggling just about bubble gum. So it's so there, but that pay formation, wanting us to really accept that as you're going through this exercise for everybody, not just people on this panel, the company is serious that it wants faith formation that you be able to locate it and what we're doing. And so where is that in my thing? But you all are doing a great job at finding it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hacker, and thank you to our panelists. I think we're going to transition now. As we do so, I want to suggest, along with what Dr. Hacker was saying about kind of reading your group around what is the practice that will emerge as meaningful for that group, it sometimes involves in the beginning putting together a variety. There are varieties of gifts, yet the same spirit, but naming there might be a moment that doesn't feel familiar or comfortable for you. How can we bear witness to one another's spiritual practices that might not be the same as ours? Same in our learning moments. We will have exercises. We will have passages of time that you're thinking, this is not how I learn. And we recognize that, and we hope that you can bear witness and honor that for someone else. This is their moment, and then yours is coming. So for those of you who wanted all morning to get up and move, your moment has arrived. Bill, we're yours. Stretch break.
Starting off with a bad note.